that, and we're good to go.
Okay.
We're excited.
Welcome.
Right.
Welcome, everybody. I'm going to introduce our presenter now. Dr. Marc Austin serves as the Associate Provost and Dean of Augusta University Online. Dr. Austin has spent the past 2 decades launching the new and innovative approaches to online, executive, and adult learning programs. Most recently, Dr. Austin served as Executive Director of Innovation and New Ventures at George Mason University, where he oversaw the Continuing and Professional Education Division. He was instrumental in developing micro-credentials at Mason program in collaboration with partners such as Amazon, as well as launching 20+ online graduate programs to help Mason rank 7th in the nation for best online colleges for ROI and master's degrees. Dr. Austin is an ardent advocate for pathway programs taking students from community college to 4-year degrees and was instrumental in starting up the Advanced Nova Mason Partnership, which the Aspen Institute described as a gold standard program for degree-seeking community colleges. Much of his work has focused on skills-based learning and workforce outcomes. Dr. Austin has been a featured speaker for WCET, the Chronicle of Higher Education, ASU GSV, and others. For the past 8 years, he has served as visiting professor at Georgetown University School of Business, where he teaches corporate strategy, drawing on over 50 years as a management consultant. Dr. Austin holds a PhD from Columbia University, an MSc from the London School of Economics, and a BA from the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Dr. Austin.
Thank you. Well, I am really excited to be here today. Thank you for the invitation, Alex. It is not often that I get a chance to sit in a room with instructional designers and learn about the innovation and new ideas that you're bringing to higher education and to learning. And I've been really impressed over the past couple of days, not only with the discussion that you've had, but also the students. That panel was terrific to just hear about what the experience is like at the front end. And you'll note that my title sort of suggests that this is going to be an administrative discussion. It may not be the technical discussion of defining online universities and online learning, but it is one about communication. How are we communicating about online education to our learners, to our faculty, to our critical stakeholders? And this is really critical for me, in particular, as I move into a relatively new role. So as I moved into that role of Associate Provost and Dean of a brand new online university, the number one question that I really had was, how are we defining at Augusta University online learning? It's important for so many dimensions, and we'll talk about it. I began to explore this question the way a classic social scientist does, which is try to my best of my ability, organize things into boxes. If they don't fit into boxes, it can't be communicated. We can't understand it. So how do we organize those things into boxes? And so I began the classic social science experiment of data collection, but I didn't have a whole lot of data as I moved into this role in this discussion. So I thought, okay, what do I do next? Let me reach out to 10 of my favorite colleagues and ask them about their definitions and their experiences. So what I'm going to walk you through today is more of a qualitative examination of how different universities are examining online education. And Josh Kim at Dartmouth said, "Hey, Mark, this looks interesting. You're reaching out to a lot of people to begin to define online learning for your organization. What are you finding? What are you learning?" And I said, "I have no idea. Let me take a look at this data and see if I can put something together." And he said, yeah, we should do that. And then we'll write it up and stick it inside higher ed. And that's how Alex came to me. So these are some of the learnings and some of the insight that I got from that exploration. But it really was to drive something very special. I can't believe, honestly, that I'm standing here today because only 9 days ago, we actually launched this new online university. So thank you. I can't believe I'm standing here because there is so much work to do. You guys are light years ahead of where Augusta University is. And I'll just give you a minute about Augusta University. It is based in Georgia, in Augusta, Georgia. It's gone through many name changes. It's gone through consolidations, all the experiences that many of you have seen in your academic lifetimes. But I think of Augusta University as kind of like the Georgia Tech of healthcare. That's really their specialty and specialization. They're one of the oldest medical schools in the country, and actually one of the largest. Only dental school in Georgia, only nursing school public. So very interested in healthcare and also cybersecurity because of the military presence. So that's a little bit about this university and what we walked into. But what I walked into in particular was this, right? We had just gone through an explosion of online learning, one of the biggest experiments that we've ever seen in distance education that we've all experienced in different ways. And when we go through something as tectonic as the distance learning experiment that we just went through, you end up with a range of things. And at Augusta University, I found all of them. There is every different type of modality that you can imagine in online learning. And as I began to engage the faculty and the students, and I said, so what's online learning mean to you? I was barraged with an array of different terms and references. So sometimes I think in conferences like this, we understand each other. We understand everything when we say active flex or high flex or blended model or virtual, and we get it. But the reality is not everyone gets it. I'm very proud of myself that I actually got active flex in this. I knew that was coming, I guess, right? So, but there are so many different modes and so many different modalities. And just think about the confusion. I mean, when you leave this conference, how are you explaining online learning to those who really don't know much about it? And that's kind of the place I was in particular, as I entered into Augusta University. My favorite one on this list is bisynchronous. Like, I still can't quite figure what does that actually, anyway, so we'll just leave that alone. So I was confused, and I realized there were some serious reasons for me to be concerned about our online definition, not just the federal reasons, but they are there for sure. In the absence of a good common definition, you not only miss intersubjective understanding, which is critical, but you potentially could affect your Title IV funding. Seems like everything could affect your Title IV funding. You know? So, I mean, I'm just going to say, yes, definitions affect your Title IV. So you have to figure out what is 50%, when do you cross the line? And everyone seems to have a slightly different percentage there too. So that's one problem. Accreditation is another one. When does a substantive change occur? When have you created a new modality? When have you transitioned from one to another? When do you need to report it? These are big operational problems. And then you go down the chain to something more fundamental. When do I know that I'm at scale in online? If I've never defined it, I can't really describe it. That affects my budget. That means I can't hire more instructional designers or great teachers or what. So it's really important as a business owner, which is essentially what I am, to be able to define it so I can make a great argument to my budget owners, right? I need to understand when I'm at scale. And then it gets even more complex. And boy, last night I was really thinking about that. All the facilities that you need to manage an effective online learning experience when it is a mixture of different types of modalities. Again, it's another reason why we really need to be crisp on our definition of what do we mean by online. And then the last one is really, I guess, the social scientist in me. How do I share information about online when I can't compare it with other universities? And I mean, that's what I love about being in an event like this, is that I can hear you and understand what you're describing. But sometimes you'll say, oh, we do it online, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait a minute, is that the same thing as I do? And then are the practices commensurate? Can I be able to, can I share them? So we really do ourselves a disservice, I think, if we're not using some common terms and references. Those are the operational. But let's talk about the human dimensions. And this is where I really get concerned. The consequences of an unclear definition or use of the term online can be incredibly disconcerting to our faculty. They need to know, how am I going to engage my learner? But if I don't really understand the mode that you're referencing, it's going to be an incredibly difficult task. I need to learn the right tool at the right time. What tool is it, and how does that relate to online? How do I transition? Let's say I want to go from my on ground to online. What are the different ways in which I can transition? A definition will certainly help me understand that. And more fundamentally, it's just really hard to know what you're going to teach if you don't understand the parameters. So That's the faculty dimension. But the one that we all really worry about is the student, right? If they don't understand what we mean by online, think about, and we already know this, all the decisions that they have to make when they're thinking about coming to an online program. Travel, calendar, technology, just finding space to learn is really important for them as they think about making a decision. So if I know it's going to be synchronous and I need to engage, I need a different space than if it's an asynchronous modality where I really just need excellent Wi-Fi and access. But they may not be thinking about all those things when they make a decision. So that's another critical stakeholder that we have to think about. Plus, from the administration perspective, we've got what I call the cupcake on the green problem. I don't know if any of you have experienced this, right? Which is you've got a whole swath of online learners and the communication goes out, say, hey, let's get to know you. Come and have a cupcake on the green. And they're in another state. They're in another location. They can't possibly. What says you don't belong faster than the cupcake on the green moment, which I think all of us have had in some way. And this is actually a university that will not go named that I identified as having done exactly that. We've all been there. So really thinking about that definition matters tremendously as we think about how to communicate, not just how to comply, but how to communicate with our critical stakeholders. So yeah, this is my not so very scientific study. It pained me that I couldn't go out and collect data, but I had to do it kind of quick. I basically asked myself, all right, fully online, 100% online. I'm going to go to market. I'm going to advertise. You can complete your degree fully online. What does that mean? Right? I mean, the array of different advertisements that a student is bombarded with suggests I really needed to ask some questions. How are my colleagues communicating the differences about fully online? I made it a little bit simple for myself, which is it's two modalities. There's the live synchronous and then there's the asynchronous. Yes, I know there's a lot more complexity to all of that. Understanding hybrid, understanding face-to-face, even how we define that, another big issue, by the way. So when communicating with students about fully online programs, how do you reference your synchronous and asynchronous modalities? How do you communicate it? So I asked my 12 favorite friends. You see a variety of, let me see if I can get this to go away, maybe not, a variety of titles. So what I'm about to share with you is definitely not data. It's more tribal knowledge. All right. So it's not exactly, and I think sometimes that's really helpful. Getting away from all of the rigor that we have to face when we're explaining it to the authorities, but really understanding each other. So that's kind of what I decided to do. I got the results back and I decided I really needed a drink because all of the results came back and they said different things and no one was really consistent. So gosh, that social scientist in me again was, okay, how do I put this into buckets? And so I decided there were basically 3 types of responses that I got back. And I'll be really interested in your thoughts today about where you fit and how you think about online learning and if you fit into one of these cocktails or not. So the first is blended, right? Blended being the neon nuclear, you know, the ice and the alcohol fit perfectly together. It is when you are able to put asynchronous and synchronous together, that's the ticket. That's the future. That's where we're headed. But as I further looked at some of the responses I was getting, many of those that we're talking about blended or basically adding synchronous to asynchronous, always ended with some note of caution. Like there's a risk. When you add synchronous to an asynchronous module, you're facing some risks you should be aware of when you go down that path. So they're cautious. They're interested in blended, but they're a lot more cautious. And then there's the purists. These are the spirits purists. They just straight up, not on the rocks, nothing, just straight up. Basically, they're saying it's got to be asynchronous. If you are promising a fully 100% online experience, it has to be at minimum fully asynchronous. And by the way, when we've tried to blend it with synchronous, it hasn't worked very well. And frankly, the effort and energy that we've put into that synchronous experience hasn't worked very well. So let me take you through a couple of specific reactions that I got. And again, I think this is a discussion, an evolution. I think and it's interesting in online, it's very difficult to define it holistically across the entire spectrum. So each university is going to have to do it for themselves. And this was a very important exercise to lead us to thinking about the structures within our university about how to define it. And I encourage you to debate, like, what is the right blend and what is the right modality for explaining fully online. So blended, these are the blended folks. These are the nuclear, big, high octane cocktails. Blended, students love it. Live lectures, recorded sessions, asynchronous assignments. This is the way to go. We use live synchronous recordings are a supplement only just to answer or respond to student questions. So it's additive, but it's not like when you're adding that synchronous component and someone optionally goes to take a look at it, they will still be able to pass the course without having to go to see it. It's just answering and enhancing their student experience. So that's a good way to blend. And then there's those those total advocates. Blended is here to stay. We use live lectures with interaction, but attendance optional recordings are available. But even here, I started to sense a certain hesitation. Those that were most committed to blended learning models, they said, the best students always go to the optional material. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that the best always go to those additional resources. And so we see high usage of those resources, but we also know that those are the best students. So we're not sure that blended, it began to ask a series of questions. So the bottom line is that I heard back was it's a lot of effort. You're trying to do both, two modalities at the same time. They integrate well. And when it works, it's fantastic. It's the best of both worlds, but there's some difficulties. And that's really that second group, the synchronous, but with caution. They basically said, live synchronous works really well, but only when the faculty are really great. But that's true of like almost any course, any program, anywhere, right? So they're saying, and that added problem is even compounded when we grow and we need to add adjuncts to our model. And some of those adjuncts are unable to schedule their time. So for me, that's really important as we think about a growth model. How do we make sure that we've got the right teaching and instruction support as we move into that modality? And not all the adjuncts draw the students. By the way, not all the full professors draw the students either. So I saw that going both ways. So that's some skepticism, right? The next skeptical note was synchronous definitely creates that intimacy that we all thrive in as students and as learners, but a ton of scheduling issues appear. You have to schedule a lot more. It's really tough for the student who's 100% asynchronous, right? That's the big challenge. If our job is access, we're missing some really critical students that they want to take this online experience, but if they have to schedule it at a certain time, at a certain day, and they will be disadvantaged if they can't schedule it at that time, at that day, then that means there's a whole swath of student that we are not supporting. So it's important that's the next sort of cautious note, I suppose. The third is real-time synchronous sessions are required at our university, and they're recorded. And in this world, those recordings are not uniformly made available, but only on an exceptions basis. Like you have to come to the live session. We believe in synchronous. That's the modality where you will learn the most, but it is not an open policy. You have to come and ask for permission. But even there were a ton of caveats. Recordings can be a trap, right? Like you have to really review those recordings, really edit those recordings. Maybe you have to caption those recordings. That means when you post them, they're delayed. That can be another problem for a learner. And then of course there's I know we're going to get into FERPA later, but privacy issues, like as you record a student and their commentary, how available is it for public attribution? So that's probably why they don't have an open policy. Bottom line, synchronous is a great tool. We need to be able to use it more effectively, but we need to be really clear about how we communicate it. When we say synchronous, we know what we mean, but a student doesn't. It has to be communicated as live online so they understand the conditions that they're accepting when they join a synchronous offering. And that's so important because they're going to be looking for you to guide them into how to get through this course of study effectively. And that very first instance of when I'm signing up for something and I know that it's a live online experience, that's critical. So that was the major recommendation that they came through. Then there's the group of purists, the folks that are 100% focused on asynchronous learning. And they were basically built or attempted to build a case against the synchronous model. I'm not sure what you feel about that. I'll be interested in hearing your comments, but they said, and I heard this yesterday from someone in the audience, I set up these optional synchronous moments to engage with my students and they don't show up. Now that's true in office hours too, but we do all this work. We make ourselves available. We, jimmy our calendars to meet them and only a couple show. Students come in at various times when it's synchronous, if it's a group, and that really requires us to repeat ourselves, distraction, etc. If I add new content to something that's optional, synchronous, I can't, right? Because that disadvantages all those students that are optionally not taking that course of study. So, that optional content can be really risky, and that means it's not necessarily teaching anything new. And just finding the additional time to add that to my synchronous calendar can be tough. So maybe you can't read it, but best of intentions, basically the comment is the faculty want to be able to provide synchronous, but oftentimes this individual found that folks were defaulting to an asynchronous model anyway, right? So they ended up back where they started, which is a fully asynchronous model. And then there's the student argument, which is, mandatory synchronous works well when the instructor's great, like any course we talked about. Optional can be distracting, but I thought this comment was really interesting. Students prefer control. I think we heard a little bit of that actually in our student panel the other day. They want to be able to find things quickly. They want to be able to get to where they're going quickly. They want to feel like they're in control. If they're not, it's an experience that they're not as engaged in. So they're most satisfied when in control of when they can elect to participate in synchronous sessions, which also makes it difficult. And then lastly, just as the administrator role, I have to say that when you go with a fully synchronous route that requires a calendar, you can potentially affect enrollment because there's certain students that will not sign up for it. So that's another dimension of disappointment that can be experienced when you go a purely synchronous route. So bottom line, as I distilled it from this group, asynchronous, meaning 100% online, is asynchronous. And adding some of those synchronous elements are really extra that are not necessarily advancing the experience more. Now, you may disagree, but this is the view of a number of individuals who said it really is about getting asynchronous right before we can add more to it. I think for me and for Augusta University, which is in an earlier stage of development, that message is really important. For those of you who are light years ahead and have asynchronous nailed, people can find stuff easily. They are engaged. It's a high engagement experience. Good. Add more, expand. But for us, it really, I think for me in particular, it resonated that we need to think hard about getting asynchronous right first and then building. So a couple of takeaways: a lot of effort when you want to do blended right. Takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. Using synchronous really does need to be communicated in a very clear way as a live experience so people can understand their calendars, both faculty and students. But at the end of the day, it's really all about communication and how we communicate at the front end of our learning experience, what you can expect. And defining online is one way to make sure that we're communicating effectively. I want to flag two practices that we built as a result of this exploration. Obviously, a qualitative exploration, but one that really led to, I think, some very useful practice at Augusta University. First, we built a coding decision matrix. So faculty would come to me and say, I think I've got this course that sort of fits into this box. We realized we can actually help them define what we think they should be focused on in terms of online education. So that coding matrix really allowed us to build a dialogue with faculty about what types of online teaching we expect them to do and what they'd like to be able to do. So there's a whole criteria list that they go through when they think about the course that they're building and want to put it online. The second is more of a teaching tool, frankly. I really struggled with the notion of optional synchronous. How can we use that in a way that is most productive? Both productive for the faculty as well as for the student. So we set up a learning rule within our instructional design. I'll be interested also in your feedback. Our focus is graduate studies primarily. So that's also part of the difference that you may hear. But graduate students in master's programs seek references from their faculty. How in a fully 100% asynchronous modality can you write a reference, an effective reference for a student, for a learner that's going through your program? Certainly the discussions give you some insight. Certainly the projects give you some insight. But when we want to add synchronous, we need to make it a conditional synchronous moment. And by that, I mean an opportunity for us to tell the student, if you'd like the faculty member to write your reference, you're going to have to come to the synchronous experience. And that may happen a couple times throughout the semester. But if you don't, you cannot expect a reference. So students are there for grades, their students are there for the experience and learning, but they're also there for that connection with the faculty. And we need to enable that. And for the students that decide, you know what, I don't need that, it's fine. And then the faculty isn't spending as much of their time building synchronous experiences for students that don't necessarily need or want them and can get through fully asynchronous. So those are two ideas that we built. Now, there's a lot of limitations to what I did and how I examined it. I didn't engage learners. That's the first thing really I needed to be able to do to define online. Employers, I'd love to understand what is it that the employers are looking from an online experience. Diverse communities, how did they are not necessarily represented currently in the way we deliver online education. And that's important for how we define success. We also need to ask, what should online be? And that's what this conference is all about. What is the future of online? And so as we build a definition, it does need to be something that is mutable over time, that isn't rigid, so rigid that it doesn't allow for those innovative opportunities. By the way, there's a lot more definitional work that we need to do. I think hybrid and face-to-face also lack definition. When, in particular, in face-to-face are we actually embedding now technologies that make it more online? So there's a lot more work to do. As we think about the future at Augusta University, as I mentioned, our focus really has to be on building that 100% asynchronous model and layering in all the advantages over time. But at the end of the day, we all have to ask the same fundamental set of questions, regardless of our starting point, as we think about defining online. Will students get what they expect? I think that is a really critical function that we all play in how we communicate about online. Will faculty be engaged? Are they interested in teaching in the modality? I won't put anything online if faculty aren't interested in teaching online. That's a really critical component, in addition to, is there student demand? And does a definition, as I mentioned before, allow for continuous improvement and innovation? So bottom line is, online has great opportunity to enhance our learning experience, but we really need to be clear about exactly what we mean when we explain online to our critical stakeholders. So that's my exploration and study, and I really look forward to your questions about how you think about defining online in your experiences. Yeah. Oh, great. Oh, yeah. Let me make sure and hit those.
Thanks. Thank you very much. That was a terrific distillation. And I'm curious how you're going to be addressing labs. We're questioning how we can make those skill-based experiences more meaningful when they never come to campus.
Yeah, so for that reason, our starting point, especially in allied health, is a big challenge because they have to come to campus. So we need to be able to communicate a practical experience that will require them to come to campus. We're also within Georgia have a unique structure where we manage many of the community health centers across the state and also hospital system. So as we think about online for that experience and how we define that, it's going to be, we're going to have to again define it as experiential online or some practical based online experience. That also, by the way, has an impact on internships and other components of what we would need to do. So yes, it's about partnering. And that's one reason why, at least as we launch, we're only focused on didactic and not experiential learning as the asynchronous model. But then we need to be able to combine in the labs through those partnerships. Yep. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to read. So Deb, any questions on virtual?
Yes, we have a question. In the conversations, did administrators seem to equate emergency online learning, what we had during COVID, with purposeful remote instruction?
Yes. I think the concern that I saw across the board from these administrators and faculty was the experience that COVID left for many of the instructors, which is synchronous was really complicated for them to manage. So I think there is some bias in this particular sample because of the recency of the COVID experience. And that's probably why I saw so much skepticism, a little bit surprising, to be honest with you, around the synchronous model, because I think a lot of faculty had come through it. So that's a very, very good point. Definitely true.
I'm really curious for those in the room that may teach online, fully online asynchronous. Can you raise your hand if you teach fully online asynchronous? And maybe for those who are online virtually as well, just raise your hand. Have you ever written a recommendation for one of your fully online students? So I'm just curious, I think you mentioned that you're requiring some sort of a synchronous online component for the folks who are teaching, fully online students, and about that decision to insist on the synchronous meeting. And I'm just
Let me
curious
elaborate
about
on
that.
that a little bit. It really is an opportunity for the faculty to determine what's the best way to get to understand the student. There's two parts to that. One is a synchronous moment, if they think that's the right way to engage with the student. But basically saying, I can't write you a reference unless I've actually engaged with you in some way. The other way that we're doing that is through projects, very specific, tailored projects for that student that the faculty works with them on to better understand who they are so they can write a specific reference. I'd be interested for those who do write references based on an asynchronous experience. How does that work, and how effective has that been?
So I teach in the School of Public Health. So I have a lot of MPH students who may have been trying to get into med school and are trying to find alternate routes. So for them, they have a definite goal and they have a plan in place.
Right.
So I often remind them that I'm probably going to be one of the people that you're going to be reaching out to for a letter of recommendation. And I can write, you took my class and you got an A if I don't know you. And so I find that they'll come to office hours, reach out to me, they'll ask questions, they'll email, they'll ask for a Zoom meeting, they'll ask for a Teams meeting. And it's small talk just to sort of go, I'm on your radar now. Some will talk about projects, potential research opportunities, but again, they're putting in the work. I do notice, however, that it's the type of student who will make the time, and it's because they're planning to go to med school. I have a lot of other students where the deadline for whatever they're applying to is tomorrow, and I get that email and I'm like, I know nothing about you. And they're like, well, all my classes were online, so I have no other option but you. So I read it. It's a paragraph. It says this person took my online class. They did well, but that's all I can speak to.
Right.
So
Exactly. I mean, I think that's the challenge, which is how do you make sure that they take advantage of you while you're teaching that course so that you can do better by them. So I think it's a trade-off, right? You need to encourage them to come to you and engage with you so that you can do a better job than just say, yep, got a grade. So that's the idea. Yeah.
Before I taught online, I taught face-to-face in K through 12, and I would have 100 students a year, and some of them would blend together over time, and I would have to write letters of recommendation. So I just treated my online students as close as I could to my face-to-face students in an analog, and I would just sit with them and not sit with them, this would be through email, but I would say, like, what would help me write a good letter of recommendation for you is for you to tell me what you would like me to speak to. You could explain to me why you are asking me to write a letter of recommendation. You could explain to me why you thought of me as one of the people that could speak to you. And what I'm doing at that point is inviting them to say, oh, because when you did this class with me and you taught this, I really felt like I grew here and here and here. And that's their opportunity to give me some language and also to remind me who they are,
Right.
which I sometimes needed from my face-to-face students because I taught 10th grade and then they came to me as seniors and reminded me. So I don't feel it was very different. And I cringed a little bit when you said like, well, if you haven't engaged with them, and I kind of said, well, if I believe in asynchronous education as a valid meaning of education, then I have engaged with them through the discussion boards, through the feedback that I've given, and that engagement does count to me. And I know that was just a word you said in the moment in front of like a lot of people, and you probably didn't mean it that way, but I just had that moment like, no, I did engage.
No, I think that's a very, very fair point. I really believe that it's important for the student, the learner, to be able to take a little bit extra if they're asking for a reference. They need to more than just tell you about themselves. I really believe it's important that they do something more to demonstrate who they are as an individual. And I think that builds the right connection. Our model, by the way, is very small courses. So we're capping at 25. So it's designed specifically to build and foster that. But I think it sets up a good expectation to say, I'll write you a reference if you take those extra steps, if you get to understand what the material is about and show me that you can apply it in any way that the instructor feels is the right way to do it. So it sets up, I think, potentially the right, but you're absolutely right. You can learn a lot about a student, and the connections that are drawn in asynchronous, I think, can be very tight, especially the chats that happen off to the side. We learn a lot about the student during that period. So it's not the only way. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to teach professional communication online, but also face-to-face. And you're absolutely right. In fact, one of the things that we taught them was how to ask for a reference. And essentially, you write a letter saying, I'm asking for a reference, and here's some things you may recall about me. And they essentially write the letter for me so that I can make my tweaks and sign it. And I do that with my face-to-face classes, online, like all students, because I think they need to know what they're asking for as much as I do.
Yeah.
And I need to know what they think is important for whatever job they're applying for or program they're applying for. So if they don't know what's important, then that's something we need to discuss further. So I think that model works, whether they're fully asynchronous or right in your face every day.
Any kind of instruction.
Debbie, this is Alex. I'm wondering if you have any other questions from the virtual
I
audience.
do. There was one at the beginning referring to the word cloud. Bisynchronous would be remote and on campus. And if I could just add, I think that goes to the lack of clarity on definitions, and the research needs to continue as you've been discussing. There could be different ways of doing remote and on campus, correct?
Absolutely. And I think the question is, how do we explain it to both ourselves and to others? I think that's really the challenge. But absolutely, you can find multiple modalities. You could be in an internship and working in that in a employer environment and sharing your experiences in an online modality. That's remote as well. Yet another location. So I think, just the reason for that word cloud was the wide array of different ways we describe online.
And
Deb?
sorry, I see there's one more question. How are you structuring faculty development to teach in these modalities?
Well, that's a huge question, right? I think number one, it's teaching, learning in terms of online education. I'm trying to get you back. We have a Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence, and that's a critical requirement to go through that experience and be credentialed before you're able to teach. So we need to build those handbooks and guidance for faculty to develop their ability to teach. And that's one reason why our focus on asynchronous is so important, because that's a skill set that I think a lot of faculty don't have. So that's our starting point. Clearly adding in the other dimensions and the other modalities will happen, but we're taking it sort of a piece at a time. in our instruction. That's part of faculty development. I think another big part of faculty development is mentoring. We haven't gotten there yet, but being able to connect one faculty person with someone who's been through the Augusta University online experience with another faculty member is going to be a critical way of making sure they develop. And then the third is some lessons that we've taken from you guys, which is micro-credentialing. You've done an amazing job of micro-credentialing. And when I was at George Mason, I kind of used your roadmap as a model. And what I found is that some of our faculty were more interested in developing their skill set in online learning and being micro-credentialed for that purpose than almost any of our students. So it was a great experience to also credential and recognize the learning that those faculty are getting. So those are the three big approaches.
Deb, anything else from the chat?
That's all I see now. Thanks.
Okay, how about here in the room? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, so I did an online course for program management and leadership. And so I'm going back to recognizing who my students were. So at the end, if they wanted to, they could give me a up to 3-minute video capture selling themselves on why I should do anything for them. Telling me a little bit more about themselves, what they got out of the course, why they're a good leader or a manager. So they were able to take that and give me, they really enjoyed it. Some of them got all dressed up, you know, and gave those videos, and then it gives them the ability to also kind of prep for some interviews.
I love that. I love that idea. I mean, first off, just being able to introduce yourself so that your classmates, to build that professional network, the videos work so well, but to build the relationship with you, another excellent idea.
So Mark, I've taught in the Graduate Department of Education Theory and Practice at the University at Albany. I designed a course, Introduction to Online Teaching, that was mostly delivered to pre-service K-12 educators primarily. And in my course, when you said engagement or the lack of it, the same as Ed, I was like, oh, so in my course, and I think all of us or most of us who teach online asynchronously would think of our courses as very engaging, would think of us as really, really getting to know our students. That's an intentional practice, right? That's an instructional design intentionality in terms of the design of the course. And one of the things that I do is I have my students do metacognitive blogging, public blogging. I get to know my students better than I would in a physical classroom. And so when it comes to recommendations, I've written many of them for various purposes and never have met the students physically, even synchronously physically, right? Mm-hmm. But I do many of the things that everyone here has talked about, asking them to give me bullets, but from the discussions as well as from their blogs, and because I'm intentional about that engagement in my discussions, I really feel like I know the students, and I can draw from their blogs as well as from discussion posts to point to specific things about their aspirations, their accomplishments, their skills, and so forth. So I think, you know, if you have really good, if you do asynchronous really well, then you can have that built into it.
Yeah, I clearly hit a button there. And I get that.
Definitions.
Yeah, definitions. I think it goes right back to it. So I think you're absolutely right. And the stories I've heard in particular most recently about the experience faculty went through in COVID, being able to connect in a very distant remote way, but deeper, understanding of family structures, understanding the challenges that people went through in that experience. It in some ways is deeper than huge class of individuals right in front of you. So I'll take a step back from that approach, but recognize that I do think that when someone is asking for a reference, it's not just about explaining why I think I'm good and what I've done and what I've accomplished, but demonstrating it in some way, and having that opportunity to do so, I think, in a synchronous fashion with a faculty member can be a great opportunity too. Yeah.
Just in your defense a little bit, right? I don't think the idea was you can't have a reference if you don't come to one of these sessions. It's just that you shouldn't expect it. But if you have probably, I mean, you probably still have faculty who may have had a student multiple times, you know, might have included them in a research project or something like that. And again, we're talking graduate education here, right? And I remember, you know, it's my doctoral faculty did the same thing. You know, it's like, give me a list of the stuff that we've done, you know, to base off of, you know, it's for this letter of reference. So I don't think that's unusual, you know, and, you know, people are saying that here. So, you know, but I just want to point out, you're not saying you can't have one. It's just, you know, if you haven't been as involved, you're going to have to come to one of these so that the faculty can get to know you.
Yes.
You know, it's a way of establishing that. And I suppose a student could just come and, you know, start a conversation with you, you know, through email or, you know, maybe a couple of Zooms, you know, outside of that too.
Fair point. I think there are many ways to engage that learner all the way through without having to require the reference. Yeah.
Just towards the preference of folks for asynchronous, I do think that we have a bias that is persistent based on the literature that is just deterministic of what technology could do. It's only more recently that it's even been an option between the internet capabilities and the tool capabilities. And even through the course of the pandemic, the evolution of the tools that we have access to and their capabilities dramatically improved. And so we have this really historical version, you know, that's not even that, doesn't even go that far back, that was the only option for folks. And although we still have to recognize, I think that also came out during the pandemic, that not everybody has access to things. So I think there's sort of a blend there with being cautious about synchronous in addition to all the other student considerations. But I think we did hear from students who liked that synchronous experience, that maybe there are more opportunities to grow in this space, but it does not have the depth of research experience that we have within the asynchronous space yet.
I think that's an excellent point. We're still learning how synchronous models operate and where that skepticism comes from, I think, is that learning hasn't really taken hold yet. We haven't done that research. Asynchronous has been around for a lot longer.
Although there are, if you take the synchronous online out of the mix, there are a number of meta-analyses about blended learning and how blended, meaning a combination of face-to-face and asynchronous, about how that really is the best cocktail, right? But to your point, you need to be an expert in both environments in order to pull that off well, and that's not often the case. So I love to hear, and congratulations, by the way, on your launch, that you are starting off with focusing on getting the asynchronous down. I think that is an excellent approach.
Yeah, it goes back to that question about faculty development. I think there's an assumption that faculty understand how to teach in a classroom. You take it to synchronous model, it's so much more complicated. And I think the reality of teaching synchronous as well, and then adding the complexity of blended makes it even that much more difficult. So piece at a time. And
yeah, really, really great. Deb, I just want to check with you again on the virtual audience. Any additional questions?
No more questions.
Okay, so I think we should give Marc a warm SUNY Online welcome and congratulations, and thank you very much.